Well, we just passed 12 o'clock, so I will say good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I need a little bit more. We have to have interactive here. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, thank you very much. It is great to be here, a great honor to be back at Bled with a very distinguished panel. Just a quick introduction. My name is David Patrician, originally from the United States. I actually worked for the Voice of America as a journalist. I lived in South Korea for several years and attempted to learn the language, but it was pretty good. And I worked for the Voice of America in the Korean language division. In addition, I got a Fulbright scholarship, and I'm part of the Global Diplomacy Lab, and I'm currently based in Hamburg, working now in the German language with NTV. It is the CNN of Germany. So it is a great honor to be here speaking English for a change. We have our panel, and I'll get to them in a moment. But to begin with, just a quick review, because our topic today, peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and the world, is a very, very big topic with many issues. A quick reflection on preparing for our discussion. Based on which think tanks, or even which countries you ask, they say that the Indo-Pacific region generally goes between 40 to 50 countries. So let's take the average, let's say 45. But one thing we're very clear about, we are dealing with around 4.5 million people, talking about over 50% of the world's population. 4 of the 5 most populous countries are included here, including India, China, Indonesia, and Pakistan. And they are located here, and there are many other countries, of course, as well. I'm not going to list all of them, but just a few to know who we're talking about. Australia, New Zealand, Bangladesh, South and North Korea, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Japan, Taiwan are just a few. We have 4 distinguished speakers. I'm going to do a quick, brief introduction, and that was also a challenge because the resumes are very impressive and very long. So I just picked out 1 or 2 highlights. I'll introduce all 4, and then at the end, if we could give them a warm round of applause, at the end of all 4. We have Mr. Shin Kak-soo, Deputy Chairman of NEAR Foundation, former Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. In the 1990s, he was deeply involved in the creation of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, in Den Haag, Holland. We have Lieutenant General retired Koichi Isobe. He served for 35 years in the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, as well as the Joint Staff, and is currently a distinguished senior fellow at the Sasawaka, do I say that correctly? Sasawake? Sasakawa Peace Foundation. Thank you. Eric Solheim is the co-chair of the board, the Europe-Asia Center, and the former UN Undersecretary General and Executive Director of the UN Environment Program, UNEP, in Belgium. And we have Henry Huiyao Wang, founder and president for the Center for China and Globalization. China is a leading Chinese non-governmental think tank to this organization, accredited with UN Special Consultative Status, and he is a former counselor to the State Council of the People's Republic of China. So could we please welcome our distinguished panel. So I have prepared a few questions for a discussion. And please, I will address it at the beginning to one speaker, but if someone would like to add a comment or a different opinion, feel free to jump in. In addition, from time to time, for me it's very important that we do interactive. So I may stop 2 or 3 times during a discussion and say, are there any questions in the audience? I really hope we have some good ones. Just one request. Everyone has their backgrounds, their opinions. We want to keep those short. If you can, try to get to the question as quickly as possible so that we can answer them also as quickly as possible. I'd like to begin with Mr. Shin. This past May, Korea hosted the 9th Japan-China ROK, Republic of Korea, Trilateral Summit. The 3 leaders concurred that it is important for Japan, Korea, and China, whose GDPs together account for more than 20% of the world's GDP, to play a role to ensure sustainable and inclusive economic growth in the region. They also pledged to focus on mutually beneficial trade and investment, as well as a future-oriented free trade deal. At the same time, Chinese Premier Li Qiang called on Japan and South Korea to reject protectionism and embrace globalization, referencing China's worries about Western firms decoupling from China. Could you give us a quick review about this summit?
Thank you, David. And as you mentioned about the recent holding of Korea-Japan China trilateral summit meeting in Seoul.
May I make one request? Because we have a little loud outside, could you speak a little bit louder, just so that everyone can hear you well?
Oh,
Or bring the microphone closer.
maybe.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me well? Okay, thank you. The three countries just resumed trilateral summit last May at the initiative of the host ROK government. Actually, that meeting was reconvened since the last meeting in 2019 was held 5 years ago. It means that the trilateral relations among Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing was quite strained during that time. Of course, the effect of COVID-19 has some negative influence upon the reconvening of the trilateral meeting. But basically, the trilateral relations, especially the bilateral relations between Seoul and Beijing, as well as Tokyo and Beijing, was not in good shape during the last 5 years. But this time, the Chinese side responded to the initiative of the Korean government to hold the trilateral meeting in Seoul. And then we had a very fruitful, constructive summit meeting. They just made a joint statement encompassing the wide range of cooperation among the three countries in 6 areas, such as exchange of personnel, economic and financial cooperation, and sustainable development, including the response to climate change, and digital transformation and cooperation in the field of science and technology, and lastly, disaster relief cooperation. So a very comprehensive list of cooperation was agreed upon among the three countries. But unfortunately, the area of security and diplomatic cooperation fell far short of our expectation. There is a little reference to the mounting danger of North Korean nuclear and missile program. Just only they confirmed their difference of positions on this issue. There's nothing more than that. So it is quite disappointing. But in the functional areas I mentioned, there is substantial progress. Of course, these cooperation must be translated into concrete actions in the future. But the resumption of trilateral summit meeting this time is a good signal to just resolve or just improve the tensions surrounding our three countries. And they also agreed to hold trilateral summit meeting on a regular basis. So it was a good achievement in the sense of just promoting peace and prosperity in our region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A quick follow-up. As you mentioned briefly, North Korea, and as we all know, unfortunately, Korea is still a divided country. In February of this year, South Korea and the U.S., they were conducting their annual military exercises. It's called Freedom Shield.
Yes.
At the very same time, North Korea fired missiles towards South Korea while United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was visiting Seoul.
Yeah.
In German, we would say, das war sehr frech. My question to you, do you consider North Korea at all, and this is to anyone, but I'll start with Mr. Shin, an active player in the Indo-Pacific region or not really?
Well, in the deep sense, they are quite active player, just endangering the peace and security in the Indo-Pacific as a whole, because the reinforced capability of North Korean nuclear and missile program is really dangerous and risky, and having very wide-ranging implications upon the security of Indo-Pacific region. Especially, it is expected that they will get around 100 nuclear warheads, including nuclear materials to be converted into nuclear warheads. And they
Can I ask you by when, this 100 nuclear warheads? Is there a timeline on that? About
within 2 to 3 years, because
2 to 3.
it is supposed that they have roughly 60 plus minus alpha of nuclear warheads, and more nuclear materials that can be converted into nuclear weapons. So maybe by the end of 2030s, they'll have around 200. Very quickly, they are manufacturing nuclear materials and warheads. And they also developed ICBM and many short-term and short-range and medium-range missiles that can deliver nuclear weapons against Korea, Japan, and even the United States.
Yeah.
So it is really risky and dangerous.
Certainly a threat. I remember living in Seoul. The South Koreans always reminded me, I think we're about 70 kilometers from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. So it affects everyone, and certainly the South Koreans. Thank you very much. I want to move over now to Japan. We have with us here Lieutenant General Koichi Isobe. This past April, Japan joined the United States, Australia, and the Philippines for joint naval and air drills in the disputed South China Sea, as China announced its own exercises in this strategic waterway. I'd like to quote Japanese Defense Minister Minoru Kihara, who said the following: "Japan believes that the issue concerning the South China Sea is directly related to the peace and stability of the region and is legitimate concern of the international community." Just a few weeks ago in August, the Philippines, Japanese navies held their first ever joint exercises in the South China Sea as the two U.S. allies try to improve the security ties. So I just wanted to ask, first of all, how is Japan shaping its foreign policy and strategic partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region to counterbalance China's growing influence and ensure regional stability?
Thank you, David. At first, I would like to say thank you very much for inviting me to this wonderful strategic seminar forum. And I would like to say congratulations to the Slovenian government that the Slovenia is taking a presidency at the UN Security Council in September. And I feel strongly love in Slovenia by the people and by the nature and by the food. Thank you very much. And I was a military practitioner, so I'm not so eloquent, straightforward. So, but I try to be peaceful. So the David's question, I think, Japan has developed the second national security strategy in 2022, December. And this illustrates that the Japanese national interests and how we see the environment, security environment. And let me see that national security strategy. I will quote some of the countries' issues, like well, so in the national security strategy, about the China's the security describes that China has become a matter of serious concern for Japan and the international community, and present an unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge in ensuring peace and prosperity of Japan and the peace and stability of the international community. And about the DPRK, North Korea, we see that North Korea poses an even more an imminent threat to Japan's national security than ever before. And about the Russia, it describes that we perceive Russia as the most significant and direct threat to security in the European region. In addition, Russia's external and military activities and others in the Indo-Pacific region, including Japan, together with its strategic coordination with China, are of strong security concern, unquote. So I think Japan, we stress the own defense effort. This is the one pillar. And the second pillar is to strengthen the alliance with the United States. And the third pillar is to improve and invite the like-minded countries like Australia, South Korea, or the Philippines, and also as well as the European countries to promote the peace and stability, not only in South China Sea, but also in the Indo-Pacific region. Because the Malacca Straits and the South China Sea is a very choking point for the sea lines of communication for all nations concerned. So we would like to have a stable Indo-Pacific region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Anyone on the panel would like to add to that theme before I go to my next question? No? Then I will continue. We're going to move. Oh, does he? Okay, then I'm going to move over. Do we already have? Let's go. We can jump in. We have one or two questions. We have the microphone here. So we'll start with one or two questions here, and then I'll get to our BSF Young Leaders.
I'm going this week to Xiamen, China, but for business. But after I wanted to visit Taiwan again since until it's still an independent country, or going to Mongolia, which as ICC member should have arrested Putin last night, but did not. Where should I go?
So could you just repeat the question, just the question directly?
Suggestion, what to visit? Taiwan, still independent, or Mongolia, who does not
Are you talking as a tourist? Where would you like to visit in the region?
It's a...
Okay, that's a soft question. We'll take it. Anyone there?
I have no idea.
No? I can give you, I spent many years, and of course I love Korea and the Korean food, but my surprise was Mongolia. Absolutely beautiful to be in the Gobi Desert, and the music there, and the language.
The question was that ICC member Mongolia did not arrest Putin last night.
Okay, well that's current events. Anyone like to go on that, or should we continue? No? Okay.
ICC.
ICC, you mean? Yeah. Yeah, when I was counselor at our mission to the UN in the late 1990s, I just covered the whole process of creating International Criminal Court, now based in The Hague. And at the time, I made a proposal regarding jurisdiction, and it was a quite important breakthrough in the final stage of creating that court. So in the sense, it was quite memorable for me, and I'm still following up what the ICC is doing, especially in relation to Russian invasion of Ukraine.
We'll see what happened now, because it doesn't meet the obligation.
I'd like to, okay, we have to stop, continue. Thank you for the question. I see more questions. I did break protocol, but I would like to finish our first round of questions for all of our guest speakers. Then we'll get back to the speakers so we can pick up the microphone. Okay, let me turn back, and again, thank you for the questions. And I saw the lady there. In a moment, you'll get that, but not yet. Let me just finish here. I'd like to continue, and I'd like to move over to Mr. Wang. Let's talk about China. Of course, there's some good news, and there's some challenging news. China remains one of the world's largest economic and global leaders in the technological innovation. It has made substantial investments in renewable energy and green technologies. and it is now the largest producer of solar panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles in the world. However, there are some major challenges regarding China. Just to list a few: territorial disputes, including the South China Sea, the East China Sea. China has faced allegations of conducting extensive overseas surveillance and manipulation to its global agenda through cyberspace. There's been a very large military buildup in a relatively short time. Recently, I read an article in the Foreign Affairs, just to review for those that are not in the norm of this. China's Navy is by far the largest of any country in East Asia, and sometime between 2015 and 2020, it surpassed the US Navy in numbers of battle force ships, altering the balance of power in the Far East and signaling change in global naval supremacy. China's President Xi Jinping has said the reunification, as he states, of Taiwan with China is inevitable, quote unquote. Some speculation that a military attack could happen within the next 5 years. So, Mr. Wang, what is your take on this situation, including, of course, the situation with Taiwan?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizer, the Bled Strategic Forum, to organize such a great conference with such a magnificent view. I think Slovenia has really enormous convening and soft power. I was quite touched with the performance last night on Palestinian and Israel performing together. So I think that is the spirit that we should continue on this discussion. I think there's a lot of questions you mentioned are not substantiated. I would like to also coming back to the previous discussion. First of all, I think China is the largest really promoter of global trade and global prosperity. For example, at Asia-Pacific, China is the largest trading nations, not only with Japan, but also South Korea, and of course, all the ASEAN countries. And ASEAN now become the largest trading partner of China. You can see how that has benefited. As you actually also mentioned, China now is the biggest producer of the green energy. We have Eric here, he's the expert on that, but China basically has changed a lot. I just met a think tank representative here yesterday. She just came back from China yesterday. She told me last night, she was so impressed with 10 years later, she visited, there's clear sky in Beijing, and traffic is much more green, and also the digital transformation is enormous. But talking about political things you talk about, I think China is actually, on the Taiwan Strait, across Taiwan Strait, China has always called for peaceful unification. You talk about, a few years China taking over Taiwan. I don't know where is that coming from. I live in China, in Beijing. I never see any government officials, any documents said that China is taking over Taiwan in the next few years. I mean, there's no such substance to substantiate that. So that is, first of all, is not true. Second, I think that anything that China is doing is really in responding to violating of the 3 communique that China signed with US on the Taiwan principle, Shanghai communique, for example. Everybody says there's a prerequisite to establish diplomatic ties with China. 183 countries, all the same. No official ties with Taiwan. So any country violate that, China, of course, is going to protest. And China, of course, when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan as such a senior official, China protested. President Tsai Ing-wen visited the U.S., China protested. So that's it. That's basically, and also if there's aircraft or there's military come to the Taiwan Strait, China, followed and in responding. So that's probably the only thing China is doing. As far as you are talking about on the South China Sea, China actually had a meeting with ASEAN countries many years ago. They actually declared they're going to sign the South China Code of Conduct. They have a great principle there. They are still in negotiations. But basically, China get along with Vietnam. Also has some problem on the territory dispute. The head of Vietnam was in Beijing just a week ago, 10 days ago. And we get along with Malaysia, we get along with Indonesia, we get along with Brunei. All those countries have some territorial water dispute. We go get along. The Philippines, we get along before Marcos for a decade. There's anything happening. But only after the U.S. military has established 10 military bases in Philippines, Philippines gets more bold now to challenge the status quo. And you see what's happening is changing the status quo. China wants to maintain the status quo. That's it. So it's really very obvious. But what I would actually come back to our two panelists just talking about the securitization, militarization, security issue. I think we're probably talking about too much about security. China is surrounded by AUKUS, by Quad, by Camp David. They want to add Philippines, even and more country into that, which is no good. I really like what we've been doing. Let's have a trilateral dialogue. China, South Korea, Japan summit. Let's do more of those kind of things. Let's do the APEC. Let's do the RCEP, the largest free trade agreement. Let's do the CPTPP. Japan is in it, and China wants to join that. Let's go back to those APEC summit, have talk about all the economic issues, rather than we talk about those militarization and the security things all the time. So I think that's probably the narrative we're loosed already. We are not obsessed with all those military threats of whatsoever.
Can I jump in?
But just let me finish.
Yeah,
China has a 5,000 years history. Since 1949, China has not invaded any other countries, never occupied a single country, never colonized any place. So there's no really a reason to worry about China. It's a peaceful right. So I think that we really should get along for the benefit of the world, like we do economic on the climate, on the digital, on the AI, on all those things. Not really obsessed with who is going to take over whom, who is going to attack. No, China is prepared for peace.
Thank you, Mr. Wang. So, of course, a tradition at the BSF, we do want to ask some challenging questions.
Sure.
Some that are sometimes not so easy to hear or to answer.
Yes.
You just mentioned we shouldn't worry too much about the military and what's going on with China. But on the other side, it seems like the military buildup of China is happening at an incredibly fast pace. And there seems to be some urgency. So it contradicts to me to say on the one side, don't worry, we're a peaceful country. Again, we could discuss what kind of economic and political influence is used to get that peace. Every country does that a little bit. But on the one side, don't worry too much about the military. On the other side, record buildup. As we just said, the Navy, I believe, is going to be one of the biggest in the world. Does that contradict a little bit?
No, I disagree. First of all, the Chinese military budget is only a quarter of the U.S. The military budget of U.S. is equal to the next 10 countries combined, where China's total, fast train network is equal to the next 10 countries combined. China has the world, 70% of 5G networks. China is the largest EV and clean, energy producer in the world. China is really contributing to the world. You talk about nuclear, whatever. U.S. and former Soviet Union, Russia has 5,000 nuclear heads. China probably has 500. It's not compatible. So I don't think, where's that narrative coming from? China certainly wants to be compatible with its own country to have more defense capacity. But China never go into military, never travel to Hawaii, go to Cuba, or go to, Florida, and they're circulating there every day, defense the navigation of freedom. No, never did that. So I see U.S. ships coming to this part of the world all the time. I don't think China is really rocking the boat. It's really the other side as well.
Okay, says Mr. Wang. I'm certainly looking forward to our questions in a moment. But last but not least, we have a great honor to have Mr. Solheim next to me, and I wanted to give him a chance also to answer some of our questions. Trade and investment. The EU is one of the largest investors and the leading partner in development cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. A few different numbers I found, and again, they vary a little bit. The region accounts for over 70% of global trade in goods and services and over 60% of foreign direct investment. Countries like China, Japan, India, South Korea, and ASEAN member states are significant markets for European goods and services. Additionally, the EU has signed several free trade agreements, known as FTAs, with Indo-Pacific countries such as Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Vietnam, enhancing economic cooperation and reducing trade barriers. So the first question I have, Mr. Solheim, how can we expand cooperation between the Indo-Pacific region and Europe, and how can these two regions collaborate better on political and economic issues and challenges?
Thank you so much. And first of all, you may ask why a person with blue eyes and a pink hide is in this panel discussing Asia. So just to give you my credentials to be here, I was the chief negotiator in the peace process in Sri Lanka and very much involved also in peace projects in Nepal and in Myanmar. And the last few years I spent maybe more time in both India and China than in Europe. So at least I have some superficial knowledge of a very, very important region. I love your question because it points exactly to what we should do in Europe. Focus on, number one, the enormous opportunities for economic cooperation between Europe and Asia. And secondly, I mean, look, nearly all economic growth in the world is in the part of the world you described. It's half the population, but it's a much higher percentage of the economic growth. It's close to 100% of all economic growth in the world is in this Asia-Pacific region. And secondly, these nations are now by far the leaders in the green revolution. China alone is 60% of everything green. Solar, wind, hydropower, electric batteries, electric cars, high-speed rail, metros, whatever you can think of, China is 60%. But look, India will also soon be far ahead of Europe when it comes to the green transformation. Prime Minister Modi, which basically get negative media attention both in the US and Europe. In my view, is a fabulous leader for India and is much greener than any president of the United States or any lead politicians in Europe, speaking about the environment all the time, trying to drive green transformation in India, and we have a lot to learn. But to get to this, we need to get away from our security lens. Look, this is not only it's the most fastest growing region, it's the most peaceful part of the world. There is no major war in this half of humanity. Yes, there's a civil war in Myanmar, there's tension here and there, but there's no wars. Every other continent there are wars. And look to the main players. China is the most peaceful rise of any major nation in human history. Last time China was involved in a war was the failed attack on Vietnam in 1979. India, for the last 50 years, only been involved in wars with its neighbor Pakistan, not any wars anywhere else. Indonesia, the third biggest player, yes, they were involved in some wars in what is now a separate state like East Timor, but at the time was considered provinces of Indonesia. Except for that, Indonesia has never ever killed any person outside of Indonesia. Compare that to the West, and in particular to the United States of America, you see everything through the security lens. Whenever an American leader goes somewhere, oh, it's about security, it's about containing China. When Kamala Harris went on an Africa tour last year, was all in American media and also in her own perception about containing China, not about partnership between the United States and African nations, which of course all these nations want. Every nation in the Asia-Pacific wants to be close to both China and the United States, all the same. Take Vietnam as a very clear example. I mean, the United States started looking to Vietnam as a counter nation to China. Well, the first visit of the new leader of Vietnam was to Beijing. Second visit, maybe to Washington.
Washington, yeah.
But it shows Vietnam, foreign policy is about Vietnam. And the idea that everything is about security in the most peaceful regions of the world is simply wrong. And the idea that we can enroll Asian countries as tools for the West, yes, maybe in the past, but no any longer. Okay. I spend a lot of time in India. Prime Minister Modi has an Indian foreign policy. It's in three points. India first, India second, India third. He would never, ever entertain the idea that he is a kind of tool in any Western campaign against China. Of course, he has his own issues with China, no doubt. But it's about India and Indian interest. And the sooner the West learn this, that every nation in Asia has their own agency, and we can cooperate with them on environment, on economics, and it's the most peaceful region in the world, then we will do much better. Let's move aside this security lens when we look to the most peaceful of all regions.
Thank you very much. And real quick regarding, would you like to add? Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, if I may wrong, please correct me. But you mentioned about the U.S. is containing China militarily. But I don't think so. The U.S. is trying to engage with China. Just a few days ago, Mr. Sullivan, National Security Advisor of the President Biden, he visited China and diplomatically engaged with it. So I think using the diplomatic efforts, informational efforts, economic efforts, and then the last result, the military is coming. So I think the U.S. is trying to negotiating and also engaging with China, not containment, I think. This is my observation. Thank you.
Thank you. One moment, Mr. Solheim first, and then Mr. Shin. Mr. Solheim, and then Mr. Shin. Go ahead.
And that's, of course, exactly what also gives some opportunity for optimism. Because there is no way we can go back to the Cold War. Look at the time of the Cold War, there was no economic interaction whatsoever between the Soviet Union and the United States. Now the economy is completely interwoven. There's no way you can separate without enormous consequences for the world, and everyone knows. Secondly, at the time, the two camps had a very different ideology. Now, basically, the ideology in both places is exactly the same. In the United States, the ideology is America, 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 and then capitalist economy. In China, it's China, 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 and a capitalist economy. There's no different ideologies taken to the world. So there's every opportunity to interact, but the United States need to step down this security lens. Look, if the United States were to reduce its military spending to Chinese level, not per capita, but in absolute numbers, well, United States of America would save 600 billion American dollars, which could be well spent in providing better education, health, infrastructure in the United States. And I believe, I mean, the reason why quite a few people in the United States, one reason, support Trump is that they believe he will be less aggressive more, internationally and focusing more on domestic affairs. I'm not a great admirer of Donald Trump, but I'm just back from the United States, and I met a huge amount of people who saw Trump as a kind of peace candidate.
That's another discussion for a long session.
Sure.
Mr. Shin, please.
Thank you. I agree with Eric that over securitization of everything must be avoided in the world politics. But when we look at the security situation along the fault line between the United States and China, there are many potential flashpoints, such as the Korean Peninsula, the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and some more, maybe Indo-China border. But anyhow, it is true that the Chinese military buildup is, as you mentioned, very phenomenal, very fast. And according to the assessment of military think tank, Chinese military power in East Asia is on par with that of the United States, given the advantage of geography for the Chinese side. So in the sense of the maritime security in this region is a kind of public goods to be provided by those major powers. But the Chinese position on the South China Sea is, in my view, as an international lawyer, quite not in conformity with the international law, as was well demonstrated by the arbitration between the Philippines and China several years ago. And there are many clashes between China and Philippines and China and Taiwan. And even in the Korean Peninsula, China is covering North Korea in just letting North Korea developing nuclear weapons and missiles. So in that sense, it is quite natural that we have to pay attention to securing security to prop up our economy in this region. That's what I want to say. Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Shin. Mr. Wang, I think you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that there's of course there's a trust issue, there's a concern, there's a different system. There's my friend Graham Madison called Hide's trap. All the things played with the current 21st century geopolitics. But I think probably sometimes people should look at the fact. What China is doing basically, China is really promoting the economic globalization. For example, 11 years ago, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative. It's not perfect. It's not really ideal for every country, but it does invested, $1 trillion for 3,000 projects. And 150 countries, 40 countries has actually signed up on that project, which is something real going on. I mean, you don't see any other things on that magnitude. On that, Ukraine was even part of that too. So that's number one. Number two, China is also pursuing economic cooperation. For example, China pushed for RCEP, the largest free trade agreement. China wants to join CPTPP, again, more high standard of free trade agreement. And then China is having all-continental economic summit. For example, right now in Beijing, 60-some country of African leaders in Beijing gathered to talk about China-Africa cooperation. Many projects are discussed. China is talking with Central Asia Summit, China Latin American Summit, China ASEAN Summit, China, also the Arab Summit. China is establishing economic globalization, having all those economic circles built up all the time, all year round. Not economic. China never aligned with anybody. China never have a military alliance of any kind. So, on the contrary, we see many economic alliances established surrounding China. So let's really, as I said, let's not over securitization. Let's really push for the economic globalization, prosperity, because I think the biggest risk, we're talking about the risk, the couple, biggest risk is we're losing prosperity, losing trade, losing free trade, losing all those benefits people are getting. If we're losing that would be the biggest risk, biggest decoupling we're having. So let's not forget that.
Understood. Thank you. We have one more closing remark, and then we'll move on, and then we'll get to our questions. Please, sir, you wanted to add?
Yes. Let me point out the militarization of the South China Sea. I think China is in the side of the changing the status quo in the militarily, because they are making a military base in South China Sea. And also, a few weeks ago, just a week ago, Chinese airplane intruded the Japanese territorial space. So when I see this kind of military activities, I am very much wondering why the PLA, People Liberation Army, are so assertive against us. I think I cannot understand the reason, because if the China attaches importance to the economic activities, they don't have to be so assertive in the military field, I think. This is my point. Thank you.
Mr. Wang, may I ask you a question? We've heard concerns from Mr. Shin and Lieutenant General Isobe. Can you think that, I know you don't represent the government of China, but could you maybe understand some of the concerns that some of these countries are having? Or, in your opinion, are they just seeing it the wrong way?
No. I think they have some concern. I understand that, but I would really think it takes two to clap, because, for example, as I mentioned on South China Sea, China maintained all the good relations with all the other ASEAN countries. They'll have some dispute on South China Sea. China said a long time ago, let's joint explore, joint development, joint benefit. I mean, China still holds that position. On the Philippines, of course, we get along with the previous president of the Philippines for a decade. No big issue. And not really big issue. But then now, since they are returning of the 8-9 military base of the U.S. now, Philippines gets more bold to challenge the status quo. That's what exactly happened. China wants to protect the status quo, and then Philippines is sending ships all the time. So that's what happened. As far as Japan is concerned, China wants to, have this trilateral dialogue. China wants to maintain good relations with Japan, with South Korea, everybody. There could be, There could be there's a Japanese coming to the Chinese place, or Chinese. There's something happen from time, but it's not a really major issue, as I think. And as far as North Korea is concerned, I really want to propose, why don't we have a four-party talks? We still have a ceasefire agreement signed in 1953, by China, U.S., both Koreas. Let's do a peace talk. Let's do a four-party talk for really resolve this North Korea issue. Not only that, I was even thinking, can we invite North Korea into RCEP? Or even this trilateral, China, South Korea, Japan talks.
Very radical.
Let's get North Korea into APEC. Let's engage them, not just marginalize them, and then they're going to push to the wrong side, and they're going to really rebel, of course. So let's do something different.
I got to jump in because of time, but I see Mr. Shin, and of course, when we talked about the recommendation, I'll give you the last word on this subject. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. I think we have to be very careful that North Korea is now under sanction by the United Nations Security Council. China must abide by those sanctions. But I don't think China is implementing those sanctions against North Korea in full manner. So that's why North Korea is continuing its nuclear and missile program. And it actually has accelerated those activities even after the Hanoi U.S.-North Korea summit meeting to resolve this issue. So I would like to ask the Chinese government to be more circumspect in just reining in North Korea, just reinforcing its nuclear and missile capability. Otherwise, it will backlash against China in the near future, and just generating a kind of nuclear domino in our region. It is not in the interest of China and other countries in the region. Thank you. Yeah.
I do apologize. I still have one last question, then we go to our audience, and of course everyone will have a chance for a final statement. We have to talk about India. As most of you, I'm sure, have read, it has recently become the most populous country in the world. India's Look East policy has strengthened India's political, economic, and cultural relations with the countries of Southeast Asia and Pacific. Some projects include, and I'll try to say it correctly, the Agartala-Akhura rail project, the first rail connecting northeastern India and Bangladesh. And of course, Bangladesh also just recently had very big political changes. So it's just a general question to any of you. The last few years, the changes going on in India, we hear about the population, we hear about the economic growth. I personally don't see so much about the military, what's going on. I don't think it's one of the biggest military in the regions, although certainly the biggest player. Anything about India, generally speaking, and the Indo-Pacific security region? Open to any of our guests.
I mean, in military terms, of course, India is still a very weak power compared to both the United States and China and everyone else. But with 7% economic growth every year, if that continues, of course, the military will grow in India. That's basically what has happened in China also. I mean, basically in China there's been a one-to-one relationship between economic growth and increased military spending, and that for sure will happen in India. But at this stage, at least, India has no ambitions outside its own neighborhood. I mean, it's concerned for sure with Pakistan. They have a very tense, negative relationship with China at the moment. There is a very strong anti-Chinese sentiment among the Indian people, for sure. But of course, India is largely a very peaceful place. I mean, in my view, India is a miracle of peace. Look, this is a continent of 1.5 billion people. Yes, they have some violence in Kashmir. There have been some violence in Northeast. There have been some Maoists. There have been some small, but where there is no one else in the world with 1.5 billion people with so big differences in class. Every religion in the world is there, caste system, and so little violence. Since independence, there has hardly been any major violence in India. So again, we should look to what we can learn from India rather than what we can teach India. And I will make one more point. In the West, there is just negatives about Prime Minister Modi and his leading party, BJP, the Hindu nationalist party. Well, BJP in the last election did what every Western leader would die for, kill for. They got the same support after 10 years in government as they had before, 37%. Well, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom got 33%, and it was seen as a landslide for Labour. Modi got 37% after 10 years ruling India. Well, that's quite an achievement. And what Modi tries to do is to answer the question, which first was answered by Japan, which was, how can we modernize without westernize? Japan, after the major revolution, was the first nation to do that. I mean, it modernized, but it's still distinctively Japanese. Korea is now the biggest exporter of culture in the world next to the United States of America. It's fantastic. My wife is watching K-movies. My daughter is watching K-pop. Who would have thought that possible? So Korea, again, absolutely modern, but distinctly Korean. That is the project of Prime Minister Modi, to make India very modern, but make it distinctly Indian. And he believes, and I think he's basically right in that you can hardly distinguish between the idea of India and the idea of Hinduism and all the old ideas in the Vedas, in all the Indian scripture. These are so, I mean, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all the religions which come from India. It's very hard to distinguish between these Indian roots and India. So I think we should admire him, give him a lot more credit in this project of modernizing India while keeping really to the roots of India. That was Japan did, that was Korea did, that was what China did, and that's what Prime Minister Modi is not trying to do in India.
One more, Mr. Asobi, and I believe Mr. Wang wanted to also say, please. And then we're going to open it up. The last two speakers here. Go ahead.
Yes, David illustrated the diverse Indo-Pacific at the beginning very beautifully. And there was a man who described the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific as a universal vision. The man is former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, and the word is free and open Indo-Pacific. This was delivered, the speech was delivered in the Indian Diet, 2007. And then 9 years after that, the Prime Minister Abe also made a beautiful speech in Nairobi. So the necessity of connecting two oceans and two continents, Asia and Africa. So I think this is the first initiative that Japan has started. Let's make a free and open Indo-Pacific. And India is a key player in the Indian Ocean region. So I hope that India would become a democratic, already democratic, but continue to democratic and also rule-based orders, respect to that. So I hope India would become a major global player very soon, I think.
Thank you. It's a distinguished panel, so I'll make an exception, Mr. Wang. Mr. Shin, please as short as possible, but that's the final two words. Then we have to go to the audience. That's the rule. Go ahead.
Thank you, David. Yeah, no, I think India is a great country and has one of the longest civilization as well. And China and India are really a lot of similarities. I mean, both are most populous country in the world. And China actually, imported the Buddhism from India. It was a big influence from India. And so I really think that, we have so much in common, urbanization, and also climate, environment, all these digital, so many area of collaboration. So I'm very glad to see the Indian government now recently has relaxed the Chinese business visa and also relaxed the Chinese investment into India. So I'm sure that, China and India should find a way to really work together as the two largest economies. And also we are all pro non-alliance and also pro global south. I mean, China and India has no conflict at all. I think they are also calm down on the bordering issue, and it's a wasteland there in that part of the region. I mean, there's no point, fighting over that kind of peaceful icy land. Now, I think they're really coming down and talk, and I hope that China and India can really get along and be a biggest two partner, big neighbors. I really have a great optimistic on that in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Shin.
Thank you. Like the previous speakers, I have no doubt about the great potential and actually real success India has made during the last decade. And we are expecting India to become the third largest economy maybe in 2027 or 2028. So India is the largest democratic country, and India is very nowadays becoming active in promoting peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region, maybe through Quad and other minilaterals with neighboring countries. So I hope that India, as the champion of the Global South, make contributions to the peace and prosperity of our region as an honest broker. What I mean is, India is still supporting Russia in waging invasion war against Ukraine. I think that must be corrected in the sense that it is quite contrary to the spirit of the UN Charter. So I hope that India, just with increasing weight in the international politics, is expected to be more forthcoming in upholding the rules of law and liberal international order that has supported the international order since the end of the Second World War. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, it is now time to turn it over to our floor. We'll be going to in one moment. Just again, a reminder, please try to go as quickly as possible to your questions. And I won't say it's a lightning round, but try to keep our answers as short as possible. I saw several hands. We'll begin with you. I know you've been waiting very much. Thank you.
Thank you for the in-depth panel. My first question is to Mr. Wang and followed up to Mr. Sobe. I would like to counterbalance you in following question. The ASEAN countries, 5 of them have claimants in the South China Sea. Despite their claimants, you tell us that you have terrific trade relations with ASEAN, even with those who are claimants in the South China Sea? And the other question
No, I do have one rule, sorry. Just one question, the first round, and we'll get to the second one, because that's a big question, okay? Is that directed also at someone or at the whole panel? Combined. Then one sentence, short follow-up.
Okay. And Mr. Sobe, you said in your security arrangement, ROC, your country, and Philippines, why are the other 9 ASEAN states not included in the security belt?
Okay, very good, thank you. Bring the microphone. Please, if you'd like to go, Mr. Wang first.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think that's exactly the point. I think, China knows there's a dispute in the South China Sea. China never denies that. But so China wants to solve that with the ASEAN on this South China Sea Code of Conduct meeting, and they are still in talks. So as I said, there's 5 other countries may all have similar problem, but we have excellent relations. So let's hope that we can get an excellent relation with the Philippines as well. It just, as I said, the recent year, the Philippines gets more bold because they had just newly installed 9 U.S. military base and even long-range missile there. So that's probably the problem in changing the status quo. But I still think, we may have a lot of differences on the issue, but let's talk, let's dialogue, let's really solve through the negotiations rather than really using really force to change the status quo, basically.
Thank you. And Mr. Shin, if you'd like to reply.
Thank you very much for the great question. And let me introduce the ASEAN Institute annual report. This report is an Yusuf Ishak Institute And this annual report says, I quote, Japan remains the most trusted major power among Southeast Asians, 58.9%. The US comes in a distant second, 42.4 point, outpacing the EU, 41.5% by a narrow margin. So Japan is the most trusted nation among the ASEAN members. And the reason why the Philippines are so interested in strengthening the military relation, security relation with the US and Japan is that the Philippines are very much concerned about their national defense. So not from the Japanese side, but from the Filipino side, they requested, I think, the US bases, and also requested to accelerate military exercises with the US and Japan. So this is the fact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some members from the Young BSF Forum. I would like to ask one of them if they'd like to ask a question. I don't know exactly, Young BSF, please, if we get the microphone to the gentleman. And it's always good to hear from the next generation coming up. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Alex from Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. Simple question to Japanese and Korean speakers. What role do you want European Union to play in Indo-Pacific? What's basically your wish list?
What do you mean, EU or NATO? Quite different.
Could you clarify?
EU.
EU. Actually, as far as I know, Korea has concluded 3 important documents with the EU. Maybe the only country in the Pacific. FTA, Framework Agreement, and other, I forgot the name, but very important document. And it means that Korea has attached great importance to its relations with the EU, not only in economic terms, but also in political, diplomatic, and other cultural aspects. So we are very much satisfied with strong ties with the EU, and the EU is also very supportive in our pursuit of North Korean human rights. The human rights situation in North Korea is quite terrible, and every year EU is tabling a resolution on the situation of human rights in North Korea at the General Assembly and as well as Human Rights Council. So we have other very important cooperation projects in the field of science and technology, and so I think we have great potential to develop close ties between Korea and EU. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the question. It's great to see the Young BSF represented here. Great job. Please, sir, the next question.
Thank you. He asked me to Japan also.
Oh, Japan also. I apologize. You want to do this part too? Please go ahead. Then we'll get our next one, please.
Well, Japan-EU relation has been strengthened since 2014. And 2014 means it's Russia's annexation of Crimea. So since then, I think in 2018, Japan and EU agreed the strategic partnership agreement. And in 2021, the EU established Indo-Pacific strategy. And Japan also developed the national security strategy and inviting many EU partners to conduct training around Japan in the Pacific region. So this kind of a relation is now strengthened.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, next question.
My name is Satu Lemay. I'm Vice President of the East-West Center in the United States. Thank you for a terrific panel. My question, one of the themes running through was the balance between the security and keeping the economics, trade, investment going. I wondered if you could comment specifically on how you read the balance now in Europe in terms of security and economics, given Russia's aggression and invasion of Ukraine, and how that applies to the Indo-Pacific, and whether Korea and Japan in the Indo-Pacific 4 in NATO see that as an expanding opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that a question for both of our speakers now, or to anyone? Japan. Okay. And due to time, please, we have to keep the answers short because we still have a lot of questions. Go ahead.
Well, about the European, I can say the theater, European theater, I think the aggregation of the military forces or the economic powers, I think the total exceeds the Russian, I think, military and the Russian economy. So I'm wondering why the Europeans are so concerned about the Russia's big threat. This is an honest feeling to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Shin.
Well, thank you for the question. And as far as Korea is concerned, we have attached more importance to security than economy, because as you know, the mounting threat from those Korea is quite real, and day by day, actually. So we place importance on maintaining our alliance with Washington, as well as beefing up our own military capability. After that, we'll focus on our economic prosperity. That's our priority. Thank you.
Please, Juan.
Yeah, I think that that NATO, the move to Japan, South Korea is really an issue that I think that's really against the purpose of NATO. NATO is across Atlantic. It's an Atlantic organization. I don't see the point NATO expand to Asia at all. So, you know, we already have a, you know, economic arrangement of many kind. We are also trying to have agreement with China-EU investment treaty. We hope that with the new parliament, with the new government, we could lift the sanctions and revive the Kai agreement. So I still think China is really interested in expanding economic alliance, cooperation circles, rather than we do all those expansion of the military alliances. NATO would big no to expand to Asia, of course.
Anyone else before we go on? One final word, Mr. Shin?
Yeah.
Sorry, because of time, I'll be the last one on this one.
Yes. The link between AP4, I mean Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, and NATO is nowadays being reinforced. And the top leaders of the 4 countries have attended NATO annual meeting this year in Washington. The reason why the 4 countries in the Asia-Pacific region are attending a NATO conference is the fact that the security of our region has closely related to those what is happening in Europe. For instance, the Ukraine war has propped up North Korea and Russia, North Korea-Russia relations. And North Korea provided Russia with roughly 6 million artillery shells. In return for they got military technology, especially being used for satellite remote sensing or satellite launch. That's quite serious for our security. So we have to closely cooperate with NATO countries for the purpose of preserving peace and security in Eurasia as a whole. The security in Europe and in the Pacific is indivisible. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, but since we started 5 minutes earlier, I'm going to take the notion and say we have time for 2 more questions, and then we wrap it up. We have 2 here. The gentleman here in the front, please, if we can give him a microphone. I don't know whether I can, yes? Ah, super. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Leo Vigor from Candid Foundation in Berlin, where I had the programs on South Asia and Eurasia. So my question is, I mean, peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific and the world, I think the key danger and threat to peace and prosperity in the Pacific hasn't been mentioned just once, and that is climate change, obviously, with just 2 countries among the top 5 most affected countries by climate change being in the Indo-Pacific, with Bangladesh and Pakistan. So what are your priorities on tackling this extremely pressing issue regarding peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific? Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. Would anyone like to shout at that? Please, Mr. Lam. And then we'll have time for one final question.
You are absolutely right, and that's exactly why it's so wrong to put this military security angle on basically everything which is discussed in the most peaceful region of the world. This is the most peaceful region. It's not that every issue which is discussed there is serious. There are serious disputes in the South China Sea, and my view is not that China is doing everything right in these disputes, but still there haven't been any wars. There are wars in Europe, wars in Africa, many military danger situations in Latin America, but in this region it's the most peaceful. So let's not come from outside to impose a security lens on the most peaceful region. And the issue you are mentioning, these are now the lead nations when it comes to fighting climate change. If anyone had asked me 10 years ago, where should you go if you want to see climate action? I would have said, you go to Brussels, you go to Berlin, and you go to Paris. If you ask me the same question today, I would answer, you go to Beijing, and you stay there quite some time because China is the lead. Then you go to Delhi, because India is doing a lot. And then you go to Jakarta. Indonesia has now stopped deforestation, the second biggest rainforest nation in the world. An enormous achievement, not just for Indonesia, but for the entire world. So maybe it's time for us in Europe and in America to learn a little from the leaders. Just as an example, quite recently I was to Gujarat in India, where the Adani Group, Adani is the biggest or second biggest richest person in India. He has made his fortune from coal, but now he goes massively into solar. And the new solar plant which he is establishing in the desert of Gujarat, how big is it? Well, that one plant is 6 times the entire grid of Nigeria. That's the biggest nation in Africa. It's as much as the combined hydropower production of Norway, and we are 100% powered by hydro. So this is huge. And there's nothing similar to this development, neither in the United States nor in Europe. And now I gave examples from India. I could give examples for China for sure on the same. But let's start listening to the leaders on climate change, and let's not impose our security lens on a region which at this point is largely peaceful. This is not to diminish the threat from North Korea, as you speak about, not at all. It's an absolute serious issue which need to be handled. But still, there are no wars of any significance in this half of humanity.
Great, thank you very much. Time for a final short question, sir, and a short answer. Please, you have the honor.
Thank you. I'm Satoru Onoda from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Japan. And I have a short question about the relationship between economy and security. My question mainly goes to Mr. Ek and Mr. Henry. Do you believe that economic capacity or environmental capacity of China can solve or at least reduces the security concerns in the region? So recalling the historical fact that the France and Germany enjoyed the economic tie just before the World War I, and Japan was the largest economic partner of the United States just before World War II, I think putting aside the security concerns and over-focusing the other matters like economic or environment is kind of for my take, is oversimplification of that.
Due to time, it's a good point, but just to the question, I apologize. The question is...
That's my question. Do you believe that the economic capacity can reduce or solve the security concerns?
Good, excellent question. Please, final statement.
Okay.
And again, we have to be brief. I apologize.
Yeah, no, absolutely I do. I think the prosperity, generates a lot of security and stability, because you know, after all, we have to really, we are so intertwined. I mean, we cannot afford, we're in a nuclear age now, so how can you afford to have a war now? And I'm sure that with all the international community working together, and particularly with more threatening challenges like climate, like, you know, AI, like, you know, pandemic, we should really work together on those challenges rather than fight among ourselves. It's really silly. So I think it's important that we establish a new narrative and we fight a new common threat rather than fighting ourselves.
Thank you very much. Final statements, very brief, very brief. Mr. Chintu.
From 1945 to around 1980, East Asia was the most violent place in the world. Korea, Vietnam, there were a number of other conflicts. At that time, nearly 80% of all who died in wars in the world were dying in East Asia. Since 1980, hardly anyone has died in military conflict, and it's turned from the most violent to the most peaceful part of the planet. Why was that? In my view, because the East Asian nations started to completely prioritize economic development. Deng Xiaoping became the leader of China, and he basically said, if you want to grow, if you want to make China rich and happy, well, we cannot afford to spend time on all these conflicts.
And
so you are absolutely right that economic development has a tendency, there's no guarantee, but it has a tendency to reduce violence.
Excellent. Mr. Shin.
Thank you. I agree that economic prosperity guarantees the security itself. Security must be secured by deterrence or defense. That's the reality we face. Nevertheless, we have to continue our economic prosperity to just acquire a favorable environment for promoting security and stability in our region. So in that sense, I think especially with regard to global issues such as a pandemic, climate change, and AI, we must work together, as Mr. Wang said. So strategic competition and cooperation should go hand in hand for the time being. That's the reality.
Great.
Thank you.
Everyone spoke. Mr. Subi, would you like one last word? We started 5 minutes late. We're 7 minutes after, so we're only 2 minutes late to our organizers. Please, last word.
Yes, the national leaders of every nation, I think, pursue the political objective by yielding the instruments of power, like diplomacy, information, military, and economic. So in Indo-Pacific region, let's foster and nurture the prosperous, peaceful, and free open Indo-Pacific. This is my last message.
Fantastic, thank you. On behalf of the entire Bled Strategic Forum, a great honor to thank our distinguished speakers, Lieutenant General Koichi Sobi, Mr. Shin Kak-soo, Mr. Henry Wang, and Mr. Eric Solheim. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for the excellent questions. We wish you a great time in Bled. Thank you. Gentlemen, if we could stay here for a quick picture, we'll stand up and do the picture.